Good to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What are your observations coming out of this Paris summit in the face of ISIS?
I really don't see much movement at all. I mean, the President and Putin met for a half hour, with half of that time taken up by translation. You're talking about 15 minutes. Not much got done. There's no indication that Putin is going to give up on Assad. The Assad regime itself, so long as it's there, it's the incubator for radical jihadist Sunni terrorism in Syria and throughout the region. So we're still at a stalemate, I'm afraid. No political solution in sight.
What do you think should be done?
Well, I think before you can do anything, you've got to actually change military facts on the ground. Right now, Putin is dictating the terms of any kind of possible political settlement in Syria. He's killing rebels that are associated with the United States. He's pumping in huge amounts of very dangerous military equipment into that Syrian theater. He has now got an anti-aircraft system on the ground inside of Syria that puts all U.S. planes flying in Turkey and in Syria at tremendous risks of shoot down. He is changing dramatically the way the U.S. is able to engage in Syria. We've got to be able to change that on the ground by getting real traction against ISIS and getting traction with these Syrian rebels fighting the Assad regime.
John, I understand that agreement is very difficult to come by between President Obama and President Putin, but is there anything that the two powers can agree on as far as fighting ISIS, at least? Earlier last hour, we were talking about maybe bombing the oil supplies that ISIS has. Could that be a strategy that forges that agreement?
Well, that's something that we've done together. Listen, the problem with any sort of impression of a U.S. alliance with Russia is that Russia is the primary backer of the Assad regime. They are doing that with Iran, with the terrorist organization Lebanese Hezbollah. They are part of a sectarian war against Sunni Muslims inside of Syria and in the region. And so long as you're doing that, you can strike ISIS targets, but you're not going to capture the Sunni populations, the center of gravity, that are going to have to eventually take and hold that ground from radical jihadists if you're going to have any hope of getting a solution. So working with the Russians might get you more military strikes, but it's not clear it gets you any closer to resolving this gaping wound in the heart of the Middle East, that is Syria, that is driving out all those refugees into Europe, destabilizing an entire continent.
Obviously, John, the addition of British warplanes would dramatically up the fight there. That would be probably a very welcome addition. But as you look at our current U.S. ground forces, which some say we don't have them, but we know that we do, the big conversation here at home, and it's become a big political talking point with our current 2016 candidates, do we add more U.S. ground forces? And if you say yes, how many should we?
Listen, all the generals that we respect, Jack Keane, General Petraeus, General Mattis, all of them say that you cannot defeat this enemy, ISIS, except by having boots on the ground. Does that have to be all American boots? Of course not. But there has to be American leadership in this. We've got 3,500 in Iraq already. People are talking about 10,000, but that has to be part of a much larger contingent. That has to also include regional states, includes Arabs as well as local Sunni allies, which is why, rather than sitting in Paris talking about climate change for several days, you wish the president was also mobilizing some kind of international conference and coalition of both states in the region, in Europe, in Asia, who are going to come in and help us really eradicate this threat of ISIS before it strikes us again, including here in the homeland.